Regardless
of the verdict.
Regardless of the verdict of jury.
The verdict of juries.
No player who throws a ball game.
No player who undertakes.
No player that undertakes or promises to throw a ball game.
No player that sits in conference with a bunch of crooked players.
Crooked players.
Crooked players and gamblers.
And gamblers.
And gamblers.
Where the ways and means
of throwing a game are discussed.
And does not promptly tell
his club about it. Will ever play
professional baseball.
Will ever play professional baseball.
Does Mrs. Jackson know that you got $5,000 for helping throw these games?
She did that night, yes.
What did she say about it?
She said it was an awful thing to do.
Live from Yankee Stadium in New York tonight,
Game 1 of the 105th World Series is about to begin.
You're ready for this game we call the World Series.
Are you ready?
The 105th World Series is about to begin.
That's the charm of the World Series. The two champions coming at each other.
Go, let's go!
Just means so much. It's that clash, and that's why I think it resonates.
There's almost something religious about the World Series.
There is not a bigger stage, there's not a bigger spotlight.
The crowning of the true champion of America's national pastime, our game.
But the majesty, magic, and memories that we've come to associate with the Fall Classic were almost lost forever. Lost to events that took place more than 90 years ago, leading up to, during, and after the 1919 World Series.
One of the greatest tragedies in the history of the sport took place in that Fall Classic.
For it was then that the integrity and character of the national pastime would be tested by an infamous team.
The 1919 White Sox, or unfortunately as they have become known in baseball history, the Black Sox, give us a really interesting snapshot of what baseball was like in the late teens and early 20s.
The 1919 World Series between the White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds was more than just another Fall Classic. It was part of a national resurrection.
When the First World War ended, America went on what Ernest Hemingway called the greatest, gaudiest spree in history. And 1919 was the beginning of that. Everybody was hungry for entertainment, for excitement, for fun, and the White Sox and the Reds were about to provide that.
This would be the first best-of-9 World Series since the first Classic in 1903, and the baseball world converged on Cincinnati for the opener.
Going into Game 1, Cincinnati was absolutely a place you wanted to be. It was the Mardi Gras, it was New Year's Eve, all thrown into one.
The city went wild, crazy. They loved their beer and they loved to celebrate and they loved every single man on that Reds team.
The Reds had finished with the best record in baseball, yet were somehow still considered to be the underdog.
The White Sox went into that World Series incredibly heavily favored to beat the Cincinnati Reds.
All of the sports writers said that the Sox, they'd probably take it in the first 5 games. The Reds, they don't have a prayer.
Then again, the American League had dominated the World Series for the past decade, and these Sox were good.
Yeah, this was a very good team. 1917, they won the World Series. 1918, they lost a lot of talent due to either people going into the military or, for the most part, going into draft-exempt jobs.
So they weren't able to repeat, but the team in 1919 was largely the same team that had won the World Championship in 1917.
There was no questioning their talent. No American League team had won more than the 245 games Chicago had accrued over the last 3 years. And the unquestioned best hitter on the team was shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the greatest players of his era.
Jackson was always a hitter. This guy was born with a bat between his teeth. He could not swing and not hit the ball. He was just one of those freaks.
They did have two of the greatest players in baseball in the same squad, Joe Jackson and Eddie Collins.
Eddie Collins was the star second baseman for the club. He was the captain of the team.
Aided and abetted by some first-rate players like Buck Weaver.
As Ty Cobb said, he was the best third baseman in the game. Buck was an incredible player who put it all on the field. The fans loved him.
And then they had two truly #1 caliber pitchers in Lefty Williams and Ed Cicotti.
Eddie Cicotte was a star pitcher, 29-game winner.
Eddie Cicotte was, without a doubt, next to Walter Johnson, the best pitcher in the American League.
Fabulous players that had been written about in every major newspaper in the nation. They were Charles Comiskey's team.
Comiskey was often referred to as the Old Roman. A former player, he was also a pioneer of the game. Comiskey and his longtime friend Ben Johnson were founders of the American League.
Charles Comiskey is a true American success story. He is the co-founder of the American League, which basically shaped baseball, shaped the World Series.
Comiskey really cemented his place in baseball as a magnate, as an owner, and really the founder of the Chicago White Sox franchise.
This is a guy who really cared about the game. He went on a world tour with John McGraw in 1913 to promote the game around the globe.
Went to Japan, went to Australia, went to Egypt. He was the true ambassador for baseball.
And in 1919, he had the foundation for a dynasty.
It was just amazing how Comiskey was pulling these young players from the far corners, and they were blending in so nicely with the veteran players. What Charles Comiskey could not foresee was the level of discontent and unhappiness among a clique of his star players.
It was a team divided by personalities.
There were cliques on the team. Southerners like Williams and Jackson tended to stay together.
Eddie Collins, the second baseman, and Ray Schalk, the catcher, were buddies. But the rest of the infield, Chick Gandil, Swede Risberg, and Buck Weaver, wouldn't have anything to do with them. And you could actually see this in the warm-ups. The other three infielders would not throw the ball to Collins.
The bad guys on the team were Gandil and Risberg. They seem to have been the real tough mugs who gathered the other guys around them.
Amongst this fractured ball club was a strong dislike of their owner, and that provided fertile ground for trouble.
The big difference here was that the evil snake came and was whispering in the discontented ball players' ears.
On the eve of the 1919 World Series, the White Sox arrived in Cincinnati. And although the Reds couldn't match the star power of the Sox, they did have a standout team.
They had very good starters. This staff put together an excellent ERA for the season. They had 21 shutouts and 89 complete games. The Reds could hit, they could run. They had the National League batting champion, Eddie Roush.
I think the big thing about the Reds in 1919 was they had a very good pitching staff, very deep, and a lot of team speed and defense. The mood was very much that, quote-unquote, our Reds can knock off the White Sox, but they were the only people in town who thought that.
Despite the Reds' confidence and a superior record, the White Sox were an early 5-1 favorite to win the series. But a perfect storm was brewing, one that would threaten the very game itself.
Owners were getting the better of the players, especially in the players' view. Owners like Charles Comiskey of the White Sox, they were making tons of money. They were maybe not millionaires, but they were certainly living comfortably, and the players were certainly underpaid.
They really were, in 1919, wage slaves, people who felt they were being oppressed by the ownership that was making all the money and had all the rules in their favor.
With little recourse, some players were susceptible to temptation, and the ruling body of Major League Baseball chose to look the other way.
They were governed by what's called the National Commission. They had the American League president, they had the National League president, and they had one owner who would rotate as the chairman of the National Commission. And so there wasn't really good, well-defined roles.
In addition to ineffective leadership, the baseball world was so small and interconnected that no one wanted to blow the whistle on any perceived improprieties.
I think the idea that in 1919, baseball was a small community in which the press, the ownership, and the players were really kind of all in the same pot. You could put the entire baseball community on one railroad train. They're all traveling together.
So it was very, very much of a closed society. And under those circumstances, it made it sort of difficult for people to tattletale on somebody else. There was the sense that we're all part of this together, and I just won't say anything. We'll sweep it under the rug and worry about it some other time.
This, of course, included one of the biggest threats to the integrity of the game, the toxic relationship baseball had with gambling.
In 1919, gambling was as much a part of baseball as peanuts and Cracker Jack. You had gamblers right there in the ballpark, making bets openly. They obviously had access to the players.
Accusations of fixing baseball games dated back to the 1800s, but in 1918 there was a name to go with those allegations.
There was a lot of gambling going on, and one man seemed to be the focal point, Hal Chase, whom everybody suspected of underhanded play.
Considered the best fielding first baseman of his time, Chase was long suspected of throwing games for money, and in 1918 a baseball legend tried to put a stop to it.
His manager at Cincinnati, Christy Matheson, actually brought charges against him to the National League head, John Heidler. But when Matheson went off to war, there was nobody to really prosecute him, and they dropped the case.
Chase gets off the hook repeatedly, and when you're making sort of a risk-reward analysis, you're concluding, hey, you know, there's not really much risk involved in doing this.
Chase would move on to the Giants in 1919. And baseball continued to turn a blind eye to any possible gambling problem.
The idea that the 1919 World Series just sort of came out of the blue is ridiculous. It was the culmination of betting through the years, and finally somebody said, we'll make the ultimate gamble, which will be the World Series.
The concept of fixing baseball games for the benefit of profit was nothing new, so the thought of doing so in the 1919 World Series was not all that surprising.
There's a lot of evidence that the 1918 World Series may have been fixed. There's a gambler from St. Louis, Kid Becker, who supposedly originated the idea to fix the World Series. It is believed by some that the idea just carried over to the next season.
And the talented but discontented Chicago White Sox seemed like the perfect team to throw the 1919 Fall Classic.
The White Sox were woefully underpaid and were upset with Charles Comiskey, the owner. They had asked for raises, didn't get them. They'd asked for laundry money, didn't get it. Ergo the name Black Sox, because he wouldn't pay for their laundering of their uniforms.
Using Comiskey's penny-pinching ways as a rallying cry, first baseman Chick Gandil drew up a plan to fix the 1919 World Series and discussed it with some teammates during a mid-season road trip.
Chick Gandil says the Cubs had actually thrown the 1918 World Series just the year before. They knew that somebody got $10,000. They started thinking, this sounds like a good deal.
Gandil began to assemble a cabal of players for the fix. Shortstop Swede Risberg, utility man Fred McMullen, and outfielder Happy Felsch. All members of Gandil's inner circle agreed to participate. But Chick needed more.
The most important part of the fix was the fact that they were able to get to the White Sox two top pitchers, Lefty Williams and Eddie Cicotti.
They had to get the pitchers, but they also, I think, to convince the gamblers, they had to get the stars, Buck Weaver and Joe Jackson.
It's possible that Jackson was included without his blessing.
Joe had actually been approached by Chick Gandil a couple of times and offered the money, and according to his testimony, he turned Gandil down both times.
Still, Gandil counted Jackson as one of the 8 men who were out to fix the series. With the American League pennant almost assured come late September, Gandil held court in a Boston hotel and pitched the idea of a fix to the well-connected gambler Sport Sullivan.
He was the East Coast, if you will, head of the gambling community.
Sullivan agreed to pay the 8 players $80,000 to throw the World Series. But he needed funding for the fix and sought out the one man he knew that was guaranteed to have the cash, the kingpin of organized crime.
Arnold Rothstein was the big bankroll, the great fixer of the underworld of New York City, whether it was bootlegging or labor racketeering or fixing baseball games.
While Rothstein was considering the deal, still another scenario was unfolding between the players and a second group of gamblers.
At the Ansonia Hotel in New York in September 1919, Billy Maharg, a former boxer, and Sleepy Bill Burns, a former ball player, they are approached by Eddie Seacott about fixing the World Series. It's the players on the White Sox who are sufficiently crooked. They are trying to collect twice on the same fix.
But Burns and Maharg also needed cash, so they too turned to the man who already had an offer on the table, Arnold Rothstein.
Rothstein blows them off very, very publicly and very, very pointedly to create an alibi that he's not in on it. But in fact, he is in on it. This is a conspiracy of double-cross upon double-cross.
And still another was underway, as Abe Attell, Rothstein's associate, told Burns and Maharg that Rothstein was back in and would give them $100,000 for the fix. Abe was lying through his teeth.
A fix sounds like such an easy thing. I give you enough money, you don't play well, you lose the game, you get paid, I get paid, we all go home happily. Well, it didn't work that way with the 1919 World Series.
When the players arrived in Cincinnati, they apparently thought they had 2 groups of gamblers behind them and a huge payday ahead. When Eddie Seacott checked into his hotel room and found some money from Sport Sullivan, he felt it was a go. As Seacott would later admit during his grand jury testimony, "That night I found the money under my pillow. There was $10,000. I counted it. It was my price." And with that, the fix was on.
It was the worst kept secret in the world that the 1919 World Series was fixed.
Although the Cincinnati Reds had a better record and a deeper pitching staff, the early lines put the smart money on the Chicago White Sox.
Until you started getting close to the start of the series, and that's when the betting line began to skew ever more towards the Reds to win.
But it wasn't the Reds' talent that was swaying the gamblers. It was the rumors that they were hearing.
One of the reasons why the rumors were starting was because this was a fix that was essentially organized by the players who had to keep going to different people to bankroll this thing. So one guy tells another guy, and another guy tells another guy.
These ripples go out very quickly. You take one further step out, you have the journalists, many of them close friends with baseball players, with owners.
Like Hugh Fullerton, a well-respected journalist and a close confidant of Charles Comiskey. He heard the rumors, and to gain insight, he enlisted the aid of a legendary pitcher who was already covering the series for a New York newspaper.
Hugh Fullerton asked Christy Matheson if he would sit with him, and any time there was a play made by the White Sox that appeared suspicious to him, circle it.
Game 1 starter Eddie Seacott, who demanded and received $10,000 from the gamblers, was the first to give Matheson reason to pause.
Eddie Seacott had the greatest control in the American League. He'd only hit 2 players all year.
But on just his second pitch of the game, he hit Reds leadoff batter Maury Rath.
People were shaking their heads saying, "Hey, what's going on? That's not Seacott. He has pinpoint control." Of course, that was the signal that the fix was on.
Seacott raised further suspicion in the 4th, for with a chance to turn an inning-ending double play, he hesitated ever so slightly before throwing to second. Chicago got only 1 out on the play. The inning continued, and Eddie proceeded to give up 5 straight hits.
It was a blowout. Reds won 9-1. Seacott was hit hard.
Seacott's disappointing outing was matched by Lefty Williams in Game 2. Williams walked 3 batters in the 4th, and all 3 would come around to score. The White Sox lost the game 4-2 and now trailed in the series 2-0. The outcome gave even more credence to Fullerton's suspicions.
Hugh Fullerton told Charles Comiskey about the fix after Game 1.
Comiskey eventually took word of a possible fix to Ban Johnson, the AL president who had the power to investigate the rumors and demand the series be suspended. But the now strained relationship between the former close friends halted further action. Johnson dismissed the rumors by saying to Comiskey, "That's the yelp of a beaten cur."
Had there been any kind of responsible leadership, there never would have been a fix of the 1919 World Series.
By Game 3, the players began to get restless. Only $20,000 of the $80,000 they were told they'd collect from Sullivan was received.
The crooks decided to be crooks themselves. They're cheating the players, they're not paying off the money, they're skimming the money to place bets.
There's a common theory that by taking Game 3, the White Sox were sending a message to the gamblers to pay up, or the plan to fix the World Series would fall apart.
It was the gang that couldn't gamble straight. There were too many moving parts. Too many people cheating each other.
The Burns-Maharga group was wiped out following Chicago's Game 3 triumph. Gandil demanded and received another $20,000 from Sport Sullivan before Game 4. He gave $5,000 each to Felch and Risberg. Lefty Williams got the other $10,000 and was told to give half to Joe Jackson.
It was money that was essentially thrown to his feet, and he was told to take it. Shoeless Joe admitted he took that money, and that was a mistake. But that's the only thing he did.
Joe Jackson had the highest batting average on either team at .375. He had the only home run. He accounted for 11 of the Sox 20 runs.
Buck Weaver also had a mighty fine series.
Batted .324, played flawless defense. He didn't take any money. He obviously knew that there was something being planned. But again, who did he report it to? Everybody in baseball already knew.
Losses in Games 4 and 5 by Seacott and Williams gave the Reds a 4-1 lead, just 1 win away from the title. But after Game 4, the White Sox never saw another dime of the money they were promised, and they were left with but one recourse.
The whole fix was based on a monetary.
But any hope they had of coming back to win the title and gain revenge on the gamblers was dashed in Game 8. When Lefty Williams allowed 3 runs in the first and was removed after throwing just a third of an inning. 8 innings later, the World Series was over, and the Sox had lost.
We'll never really know what went through any of their heads, but Abe Attell described the whole thing as cheaters cheating cheaters. He had it exactly right.
But who exactly were these cheaters, and how did they cheat? With limited film of the series and no video replay, most everything that happened was witnessed once and only once. The only evidence to draw from were statistics and speculation.
Happy Felch batted .180, had 4 errors in the outfield. On the other side, take a look at Eddie Collins. He had .230-something in the series. Only had a couple of RBIs, so people could look at him and say, well, he was throwing the series too, but no, he just had a bad series. So it's difficult to say how it went.
Long after the series ended, rumors of a fix persisted, and Fullerton wrote that if they were indeed true, then the series should never be played again. The possibility that the 1919 World Series was fixed was not something most folks wanted to accept. Many reporters looked the other way. But well-respected baseball writer Hugh Fullerton saw it as his job to get to the bottom of the story despite an inherent conflict of interest.
Huey Fullerton was in a very difficult situation. He did his best to blow the whistle on what was going on, but he was also very close to the White Sox players and especially Charles Comiskey.
Comiskey, who knew what was going on, throws up a smokescreen by offering a $20,000 reward to anybody who can present evidence that games were thrown.
Several people attempted to offer him information. He never paid a penny.
Comiskey believed that if the fix was verified, the franchise he'd worked so hard to build would be all but ruined. His solution was to try to keep the sordid tale under wraps while appearing to seek answers.
He's really a man who wants to play both sides, that he wants to investigate as well as protect his investment.
Comiskey's smokescreen seemed to work, for the scandal became pretty much an afterthought once the 1920 season got underway. Baseball instead was caught up in the new live ball era. A cavalcade of home runs captivated the fans. But back on the south side of Chicago, allegations of dishonesty continued to haunt Comiskey's team. The conspirators minus Gandil returned for the 1920 campaign, and as the White Sox battled Cleveland for the pennant, hints of the team's past transgressions unexpectedly resurfaced.
The whole thing didn't come back into daylight until late in the 1920 season, when the president of the Cubs, William Veeck, Bill Veeck's father, got a telegram that said tomorrow's game is going to be thrown. Somehow this story got out, and the state's attorney for Cook County got the bright idea that he was going to investigate baseball.
Grand jury proceedings into Veeck's claims were initiated, but this would prove to be just the tip of the iceberg.
In the midst of all that, the prosecutors got wind that there was a much bigger story out there, that the White Sox the previous season may have conspired to fix the entire World Series. So the prosecution's investigation abruptly shifted gears.
Subpoenas were issued for baseball executives and a number of Chicago sports journalists. But without the testimony of anyone directly involved in the alleged fix, there was not enough evidence to indict.
After the Cook County prosecutor did not have the evidence to pursue the case, Van Johnson took it upon his own. He hired detectives. He tracked down Sleepy Bill Burns to bring him back to Chicago to testify.
The investigation got an added boost when a story appeared in the Philadelphia North American with some damning accusations.
Billy Mahar gave an interview to Jim Eisenmenger, who was a reporter for the Philadelphia newspaper, and it pretty well laid everything out, at least from their perspective.
Mahar had named Eddie Seacott as the ringleader of the fix. Seacott met with Comiskey the next day and admitted his role in the scandal.
The agenda of Comiskey was a hidden one in this matter. It looks like the entire process was orchestrated.
He hired a law firm whose only concern was Charles Comiskey.
So in an effort to protect the old Roman and his franchise, Comiskey and his lawyer, Alfred Austrian, advised Seacott to appear before the grand jury and tell them what he knew.
And here are first films ever made of grand jury hearing evidence in actual session. Testimony of pitcher Edward Cicotti is said to have been most incriminating evidence.
Eddie Seacott breaks, Lefty Williams breaks, Shoeless Joe Jackson breaks, and the whole thing comes out. The genie is out of the bottle.
The players revealed their co-conspirators to the grand jury, and soon all 8, Gandil, Risberg, Seacott, Williams, McMullen, Felsch, Jackson, and Buck Weaver were all indicted and would be called to trial the following summer.
And when, after the famed White Sox fielder Shoeless Joe Jackson confessed his guilt, it said that one weeping fan of his cried out, "Say it isn't so."
But even this story, like so many related to the scandal, may be apocryphal.
Years later, Joe Jackson said that he never talked to any kid, he never talked to anybody. He doesn't appear in the film to be speaking to anybody or stopping to talk to anybody.
In addition, Arnold Rothstein was also called to testify and emphatically denied any involvement. He was able to walk away unscathed. Charles Comiskey had no such luck and was forced to take symbolic action against his players.
He suspends those 7 players who are still with the team. He implies, however, that if you're found not guilty or if you are exonerated, you will be reinstated on my club.
The depleted White Sox were beaten out by Cleveland for the 1920 pennant, and Comiskey was left to ponder the future of his beloved franchise. While the players awaited their day in court, the owners of the teams considered a change in the current structure of the league.
The owners realized maybe an American League with a president and a National League with a president without one leader was not the best way to run Major League Baseball.
So in an effort to restore the faith of the fans and regain stability, they decided to appoint a commissioner of baseball.
Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, out of Chicago, federal judge, was a friend of baseball because he had ruled in their favor against the Federal League in an antitrust case.
When Kennesaw Mountain Landis became commissioner, they gave him absolute power.
He stepped from being a district court judge in Chicago to become essentially the United States Supreme Court of Major League Baseball. He could control the destiny of anyone who was a part of that organization.
Determined to eliminate any hint of gambling from the game, Judge Landis took office in January of 1921 with one eye fully focused on the upcoming trial.
It was a very high-profile case. There was a huge amount of media attention.
Crowds outside demanding their players be returned to them.
Of the 8 men standing trial, one was most insistent regarding his innocence.
Buck wanted a separate trial. He wanted separate legal representation. He wanted to testify to clear his name. He never had an opportunity.
At first, it didn't seem to matter, for right at the outset, key evidence mysteriously disappeared.
Apparently, before the trial, the grand jury transcripts went missing.
All that is left are copies of them, and their utility in terms of implicating the defendants in the case is ruled inadmissible by the presiding judge in the case.
There was actually no law on the books in Illinois against fixing baseball games or throwing baseball games. So what they were charged with was conspiracy to defraud the public, Charles Comiskey, and their own teammates.
And that basically was the case that they had to go with.
The trial took several weeks, but the jury quickly came to a verdict.
Pandemonium absolutely breaks out in the courtroom.
The players were jumping up and down, throwing their hats in the air, and the jury was throwing their hats up in the air, and they were shaking each other's hands.
The acquitted players were confident that they'd be back on the field for the 22 season, based on a previous statement by Comiskey. But what they didn't count on was the judgment rendered by Commissioner Landis the very next day.
Regardless of the verdict of juries, no player who throws a ball game, no player that undertakes or promises to throw a ball game, no player that sits in conference with a bunch of crooked players and gamblers where the ways and means of throwing a game are discussed and does not promptly tell his club about it will ever play professional baseball.
The Black Sox were acquitted in a court of law, but not in the court of baseball. Judge Landis banned all 8 accused.
Even Buck Weaver, who did not take anything, was banned because he knew about it.
Landis is ruling that guilty knowledge of a fix was no different from participation in the fix through the fear of God into all of Major League Baseball.
Judge Landis felt that it was important to let everybody know that no scandal, not even a hint of it, would be tolerated.
You had to get back to the feeling of trust, that this could not happen again. There was no question that if he hadn't been as draconian and as absolute as he was, baseball would not have survived.
Commissioner Landis had banned 8 White Sox players from ever playing baseball again. The cleanup of the game had begun.
Judge Landis's pronunciamento was succinct, was forceful. Basically, it laid the ground rules for a new era in baseball.
One in which gambling in baseball was now a mortal sin. Landis also took down the old guard.
Ban Johnson loses control of organized baseball, and the existing governance structure of baseball falls apart. The National Commission, which Johnson has effectively ruled for 20 years.
Baseball now had a man with an iron will in Landis to rebuild the trust, and a larger-than-life hero to rekindle interest and bring back the fans.
In 1919, the country was not feeling really good about the national game. And then this phenomenal thing happened, that a man came along and did feats on the field that had never been seen before.
People still say that if Babe Ruth had not come along at that time and started hitting home runs, that baseball might never have recovered its honor.
We just can't imagine what that was like, the kind of tonic that represented for baseball, the kind of kick in the pants it gave it after the Black Sox scandal.
Fact is, without Shoeless Joe, we might never have witnessed the power of Ruth.
I think it was Ty Cobb told me that Shoeless Joe had a style that Babe Ruth copied when Babe Ruth came along. Shoeless Joe was his idol as a swinger.
But while Jackson and his fellow banished Sox would never again get the chance to play on the same field as the Babe, some of them did find another way to play the game.
The major effect for the 8 men out, obviously, after they were banned from baseball, was that they could no longer continue the only livelihood they knew, which was playing baseball and making a career out of it. But the fact is, they actually were able to continue playing baseball for most of the rest of the decade. One of the first things they did was to form an outlaw team called the Southside Stars. It was also called the ex-Major League Stars. And they played games against local teams, amateurs and semi-pros, against anybody that would take them.
Rather than go into hiding, many of these men continued to play semi-pro ball, where they exploited their fame and earned a living.
You had ex-Major League ball players who were pretty much in the prime of their career. And they were going out there to towns that wanted them. They weren't hiding at all. They were really promoting themselves. Promoting themselves brought bigger crowds to the ballpark, increased the gate receipts, increased their chances of making money.
In the years that followed, the 8 men out settled into their communities. Joe Jackson returned to his hometown, where, despite popular belief, he flourished.
A lot of times in the press, Joe is portrayed as a downtrodden, depressed man later in life. That simply was not the case. Joe was arguably the most successful of the other 7 men.
When I was in school at Furman University, there was a liquor store around the corner from the campus, and the manager was Shoeless Joe Jackson. I'd sneak in every once in a while to look.
He had been banished from baseball, but was still embraced by his peers.
Ty Cobb met up with him in 1947. Cobb went in the liquor store to see Joe, and Joe didn't act like he knew him. And Cobb said, "Joe, you don't know me?" And he said, "Yeah, Ty, I know you. I just didn't think anybody that knew me up there would want to know me now."
This fella was talking to Joe. He saw me and said, "Come down here, good buddy. I want you to meet somebody." And he says, "I want you to meet the greatest hitter that's ever played this game of baseball. This is Ty Cobb." And Ty says, "Oh." He says, "No, I was not the greatest hitter." Says, "Joe Jackson was the greatest hitter that ever played the game of baseball."
As a result of his banishment, Jackson could no longer play Major League ball, a fact that only added to the torment and disappointment he carried to his death.
I know it tore Joe's heart. He often said he had played for free if they just let him play. And that speaks volumes to how much he loved the game.
Shoeless Joe's story may be an American tragedy. Buck Weaver's might be even worse.
Buck Weaver did not participate in the throwing of the games in the 1919 World Series. What he was guilty of was knowing the fix was in and not saying anything.
He was the most egregious victim of Judge Landis's punishment, which was to consider all of their actions the same rather than any degrees of guilt.
Buck was the only of the 8 Black Sox to stay and live the rest of his life in Chicago. He ended up doing a lot of various odd jobs. The most tragic thing with Buck Weaver as far as making a living was he became a day painter for the city of Chicago, and he had to paint the very courtroom he had sat in 1921 and been exonerated. The Black Sox scandal, it's like an American Greek tragedy because of the characters involved and the purity of baseball, the national pastime. And that's what it tugs at the heartstrings.
The idea of throwing the World Series, breaking that trust between the fan and the ball player, we were betrayed.
The repercussions of this betrayal were swift, and they spared no man.
Everybody involved in it was tainted in some way. It's almost as if the gods were angry. We'll let you fix a few games when it doesn't matter, but don't fix the World Series or I'm going to bring lightning bolts down on all of you.
The key money man received his just desserts.
Arnold Rothstein was shot to death, gambling, which was only a fitting end.
The one who helped expose the fix lost his reputation.
Hugh Fullerton, who blew the whistle, was almost blackballed within his industry. People were trying to cover up what he was trying to reveal, which was part of his job.
And the owner himself lost his own gamble to keep his franchise intact.
Baseball was his life. And this is why Comiskey tried to keep the entire scandal under his hat. To lose these 8 players meant that the White Sox were going to be a second division club for decades to come.
In fact, it would take the White Sox more than 8 decades before they would win a World Series. And of course, there were the 8 players who were banned from the game, yet who live on today in infamy.
To some extent, they're more famous for the bad things they did than the good things they did on the field.
And then there's Joe Jackson, a Hall of Fame caliber player, a man whose life has now risen to an almost mythical level.
There's been kind of this wonderful romanticism around Shoeless Joe Jackson.
People get attracted to it somewhat like I got attracted to it. They've seen the movies, 8 Men Out, they've seen Field of Dreams. They like the name Shoeless Joe Jackson.
Still today, Jackson is the only rookie ever to hit 400. And he has the 3rd highest career average of all time.
He's remembered for what he might have done, and that suspicion that maybe he didn't really do it, or didn't know what he was doing because he was an ignorant Southern boy. Maybe that's what makes him most famous of all.
The story goes that the night that Joe Jackson fell ill with a heart attack, Joe Jackson grabbed his brother David's hand and he said, "Good buddy, I'm going to meet the greatest umpire of all, and he will judge me innocent."
Also protesting his innocence until the day he died was Buck Weaver. His remaining days on Earth were filled with torment.
The tragedy of Buck Weaver is that he spent so many long and fruitless years trying to clear his name, sending letters to the commissioner in this broken handwriting and very bad command of English. He would beg for exoneration.
The quest for reinstatement of Weaver has been championed by many, and that's also been the case for Shoeless Joe, whose supporters have never wavered in their resolve.
He was involved in supposedly a baseball scandal. But you know what? And I leave you with these words. He served his sentence. He's dead.
The actual ban that Judge Landis put on those men is that they would never play professional baseball again. Well, when Joe died in 1951, you would think that that ban should have stopped, yet it goes on into perpetuity, and he's being punished to this day.
Whether Buck and Joe have been unfairly ostracized may never be resolved. But one thing is certain, the commissioner's decisive action was crucial, for it reestablished the integrity of baseball.
What he did was lay down a thou shalt edict that was as powerful as Moses handing down the 10 Commandments.
It was extraordinary and timely and brilliant because it had to be. Sport needs to have integrity at every level. And when there's a scintilla of doubt about the integrity of your sport, you have no sport left. Judge Landis recognized that, and what he did saved baseball.
It is my belief that baseball is loved by an entire nation because it embodies that priceless spirit of equality that is the very backbone of America itself.
In a saga so littered with tragedy, the one unquestionable triumph is the sanctity of the game itself.
I was sitting in that press box at Shea Stadium on the night of Game 6, the 1986 World Series, saw a ground ball through Bill Buckner's legs. There must have been 55,000 people in that building that night, and not one of them thought that Bill Buckner did that on purpose.
I couldn't imagine entering a game where there were rumors of my teammates or players on the other team fixing a game. And I think it's great what Judge Landis did so many years ago, because this game is played for the fans. And if we don't have integrity, if those fans don't know that we're playing with 100% to win every single game, then they're not going to show up anymore and we don't have a game.
The Black Sox scandal, in its way, strengthened baseball. The idea that baseball could go through a crisis, could clean itself up, could come out strong and seemingly pure at the other end, I think gave America the sense that this really was indeed our game.